I hope that this will be a brand new, happy, blessed new year for all of us. You know, there's researchers who look at these kinds of things, say that the new year is often a time our brains sort of rewire. They're just geared to take a look at the year that's been and then to look ahead to the year that's been. Any of those kinds of milestones where we're given an opportunity just to reflect for even just a few moments, to think about all that has happened. Sometimes we can go through life just so quickly, and it's really only when we take the time to pause and reflect that we can, that we can make some of those changes that we either are wanting to do ourselves, we feel God's calling us to make in our own lives. Some of the times that this is a time of year where we want to break some bad habits. We might be wanting to develop some good habits. And a fellow named Craig Rochelle, who's a pastor at Life Church in Oklahoma, who does the YouVersion Bible app, which I'll talk about later. But one of the things he says is like our strongest thoughts, really are the things where our minds focus. And so, when we focus on the negative and what sucks, sometimes that just magnifies it even more. So this is an opportunity for us to just do a little reset. And if you haven't already, just congratulate the person beside you for making it to church on New Year's Day. How cool is that? 9 o'clock, New Year's Day.
Honestly, how many people almost didn't make it? Yeah, exactly. Good for you.
Yeah,
good for you. Yeah,
right on. Very, very cool. The part of this time is that we're also starting this new series called Healthy Living 101. And for some people, I've heard some of the talk that it's like, oh, I'm not starting a diet, I'm not doing all of this, and all of that kind of stuff. It really isn't as much about that. I mean, we'll all make resolutions, we'll all start and end, and hopefully continue different kinds of things. But this is a day, a series. It's really just about appreciating, this gift of life that we have and the bodies that we have. And sometimes, through no fault or anything else of our own, they cause us all sorts of grief and problems. But they are still, and as we're going to talk some more next week, fearfully and wonderfully made. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to discover that throughout this series.
Yeah. So for today, what we're really looking to do together is to reflect a little bit on 2016 and think and pray our way into 2017. An image that might be helpful is Leonard Sweet uses the image of a swing. And how many remember being on a swing? Maybe that was a few years ago, but to make a swing work, you learn how to swing, and it's you lean back, right? You lean back, and then what do? You kick forward. You lean back, and you kick forward. And that's really all we're going to do this morning is take some time with God to lean back into 2016 and try to kick forward into 2017. So Debbie and I are going to just take some time to reflect on things that we've seen in our life and in our church, where God has been at work, if you will. And going to invite us all to be doing that kind of thinking and reflecting as well. We'll have a moment of quiet in just a few minutes to let us all do this experience. We sat around the kitchen table yesterday morning and had a little breakfast together as a family. We tried doing this, a little exercise. Hey, where did God bless us over this past year? What are some highlights, and what are we hoping for as we head into the new year? It was amazing. It was an amazing conversation. I mean, just a little snippet. When you think about our life, for those that know, we have 3 kids, a 16-year-old daughter, 14-year-old boy, and a 10-year-old son. And so for our daughter, Leah, who just turned, did I get that right? Yeah, I know, I said it right. Yeah. Anyway, so Leah, our daughter, she turned 16 this year. So in her life, which is our life, right? In her life, she's learning how to drive. She got her first boyfriend. Okay. And she became a lifeguard. Right? So that's a big year. So that was just absolutely, she worked hard for that. Absolutely. Yeah. God bless her. She's probably in bed. Yeah, but anyway, that's okay. But I mean, it was just an amazing conversation. So one of the experiences that was very significant in my life as I reflect on it over this past year was in the fall, back in October, our family went up to Mount Forest and spent a whole weekend and celebrated Mount Forest United Church's a big anniversary. Yeah, it was over 100. I said, we're at like 30. We don't even say it because it's embarrassing. Yeah. No, just kidding, yeah. But it started with an email from my dad back in the spring. And the email was entitled, Asking for a Favor. And then it said, we're having this big anniversary service. Would you come up and speak? And da-da-da-da. And then he said, no pressure, which is a line I use all the time, apparently. No pressure. But then he finished the email with, love your daddy. So I forwarded some of my friends here. I said, what do you do? They said, you go to Mount Forest. You know? So anyway, we did. And it was an amazing experience. Several things. To be together as a family was just an awesome time together. To see the way God was working in my parents' life. My dad became an evangelist in those weeks leading up to that service. He must have invited like all of Mount Forest. It was incredible. The challenge for us, was to bring a message that the church is looking for. It's a church that is in a really good place. There's some life that is starting to happen there, and it's really quite exciting. I'm grateful to see what God is doing in my parents' life, let alone this beautiful little church that they're a part of. And so, okay, well, as I prayed about the message, it was very simple. The best thing we can do for this church is to really challenge and encourage them to simply go where God leads. Where God leads was the message that God brought. And as I reflected on that, I thought, that's the best we have. That's what's at the core of our church these days. There's lots of cool projects going on. I mean, they're big. There's life transformation, part of the deal. But at the end of the day, it's simply being a part of a community where we're committed to going where God leads.
That was in part this summer. We went to Regeneration Outreach Community and offered an Alpha course there with the staff. And for me, it was really one of the amazing blessings of the year. Regeneration, for those of you who may not know, works out of Grace Place in downtown Brampton. And we did the course at a lunchtime. And it was just so multi-layered because it was offered as a way to be able to provide lunch to many of the people who are living on the street or are marginalized or maybe like one paycheck away, from not knowing where their next meal will be coming from. And so there are folks there who also experience, as do we, all sorts of challenges in their lives. And so it was just fascinating to see how God was working through that process and just to be able to adapt things on the fly, to be able to work for the community, and how God just continued to speak in and through everyone there. And that was, follow where God leads. That was a really cool experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As a church, as we think about some of the things that God is doing in our church's life, there was an amazing email that got started by Marina McPherson yesterday, and it was simply entitled, Looking Back over the Year. Can you believe what God has done over this past year? And it was to the team that had really worked to bring our refugee family, the Alma Hamids. And when we think about a year ago, Marina wisely reminded us, we were just filling out paperwork a year ago. And then if you remember, on Family Day, our family arrives. Like, how cool is that? Talk about, I don't know, God's alignment, blessing. It was just amazing. And here they are, like they've been integrated into life here in Brampton, in Canada. We're so grateful to have them a part of our life. We've been blessed in the process. And as we move towards the new year, we're still hoping and praying for Almer's brother to come as well. But just an amazing piece that we didn't know a year ago. That's, I think, a question as we sit here today. Pat and I were just talking about that when we were greeting each other. There were some things that happened over the course of this year, again, that we had no idea of a year ago. And so give thanks for those, but then also in anticipation and wonder and expectation, what is God going to do this year?
Yeah. And that it's not only, when we look back, it's not only about the really good and times that we can name and see as blessed. It's also in those hard times that we just experiencing God. In my family and in our community here, there's been some really tough times in my family. We've had, and friends, people who have been really devastated by depression and anxiety, who just weren't sure if they were going to make it through. And even in those hardest, pain-filled depths of despair, bottom of the pits kind of times, that we could turn and experience just some of God's presence, even sometimes just a glimpse of God's peace, and a hope that this is not all there is. And somehow, like, we've come through those times, and it's not that everything is perfect. It's not that everything all turned around and everybody's happy, jolly, and no more issues. No, that's not it. But there's a resilience and a strength that's growing because I really believe that we're learning how to walk with God in the midst of all those hard times too.
Yeah. Relationships are a big part of our life. That's the way we were made. We were made to be in relationship with God and with each other. And because we're human beings, sometimes relationships can struggle. We can have challenges in those. And as I think back to where my brother, Jason, and I were a year ago, I'm just so grateful and amazed for where we are today. Let me backtrack just a little bit. A couple years ago, I was with some of our friends that we grew up with, and one of them said, "How's your brother doing?" I only got one brother. We're twins, just the two of us. He said, "How's your brother doing?" And I realized I have no idea. I hadn't talked to him for like 3 months. So 2 years ago, God sort of, and decided the least I could do is to text my brother once a week. And I got to tell you, it was really beautiful. We still text more than once a week now, which is cool. But that was, there's no quick fix to relationships. They're deep and they can get complex. And so though that was good, to be honest, last Christmas Day, a year ago, on Christmas Day, my brother called and we were having a good relationship until he said this. He said, "Oh, you know what? By the way, I was in Toronto for a day for meetings in November, but I didn't bother telling you because I didn't have any extra time. And it turns out these meetings were by the airport. And all of a sudden, it was just, this is Christmas Day, and I'm furious. I said, Jace, you were 17 minutes from our house. 17 minutes from our house. I mean, if you had told me, I would have moved heaven and earth to get over there to see you, even for 5 minutes. Anyway, then we talked about Christmas. Early January, I got a text from him at almost exactly the same time I was sharing this as a prayer concern with some of our staff and friends here at North Bramley. Almost at the exact same time, I got a text from Jason that said, "I'm coming back in January to the same meetings, and I booked an extra day. Do you want to hang out?" I said, "No, I'm pretty busy. I don't know if I have time for that."
Brothers.
And that led then to Caleb and I going out there in March on their air miles, and then their whole family came in July for the carnival, all 6 of them. And so basically I sit here today, again, where I was last year at this time, anyway, not struggling. We've seen my brother 3 times over this past year. I don't remember the last time. He lives out in Alberta. I don't remember the last time we've seen him 3 times in a year, and just so grateful for what God can do in the mixture of the complexity of relationships sometimes.
Yeah. And just one final reflection, and we're going to give you some time as well to just do some reflecting on your own, and there's a space in the going deeper section of the bulletin. But for me, one other one. So some of you know that last year I turned 60, and for me that was something that for much of my later life, I didn't think I'd ever make. And so to make 60 was kind of cool. I thought, really. And started wondering about life next and next steps and where was God leading me, and had just a great joy to be able to go on a prayer retreat to Mount Carmel at the end of May with Sue and others who had been involved with centering prayer here. And during time of really deep prayer and reflection, really just heard God's calling, and it was that I'm calling you to family now. And because it's a call, I really do believe it's a call. That leads me into trust, and we'll talk a little bit more about trust, but that this isn't just my decision and all those kinds of things, that somehow, even when I'm not completely sure about it, that God is completely in the midst and leading. And so, to know that in those transitions times, and I think that one of the ones that for me really struck me was that we met a friend of Sue's, Shirley, and vibrant woman, just amazing. We were sharing a couple of days of prayer and life and joy together. And 2 days later, she has a massive stroke and is still recovering from that stroke. Small steps, but there's some sign of recovery. And I guess for me, that just also reminded me of both the strength and the fragility of life, and just very grateful to be able to share life in a community together. And I think that's part of being connected to God and to one another. Mm-hmm. And it's part of one of my really strong reflections of this past year.
Yeah. I just want to invite you to take a moment of quiet where you are. If you want to talk with somebody beside you, you're more than welcome to that. Maybe God has put into your mind some reflections from this past year. And again, how is God guiding and leading our life through these experiences? What are we learning from this part of this conversation? If you want to jot some stuff down, there is a little section in the Going Deeper, if that's the way that helps you, or just to be in some silence for a moment and give God thanks and think about where God has been at work in our lives over this past year. Just take some time to do that, and then we'll come back and carry on.
Hope you'll continue to do some of this reflection throughout the day and really think of that image, of just being on the swing today, just leaning back and kicking forward, and leaning back and kicking forward.
Absolutely. Just grateful, guys, for God's presence in this place. Just as I look around this morning, don't know everybody's story, but know enough stories in this room to recognize what God has brought us through over this past year. Just grateful for that. So we just encourage and challenge us to keep taking some time as we head into this new year to, again, like Debbie said, lean back into 2016 and see where God's been at work. As we kick forward a little bit and think about 2017, what are some hopes and dreams, some plans that God might have in mind for us? Again, recognizing there's many things that we have no idea about that are going to happen over the course of this year. Can't wait to, January 2018 to look back and see what God has done. But at this point in the game, what are maybe some hopes and possibilities? I gotta tell you, just even as a church, we're excited about where God continues to take us. These big block letters that are around us in the sanctuary, they continue to be a reality, a vision that God makes real, and we're just so grateful for that. We mentioned about the refugee sponsorship as that has happened and will continue hopefully as we move into this year. The Soul Cafe has a pilot project starting up in the first quarter of this year. You'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. We're excited about that. The Resource Church and Leadership School, we're having some really big conversations with the United Church of Canada right now to take some learnings that we've had over the last 2 to 3 years and what that might mean as we move forward together. It's a time of discernment. Your prayers on that would be greatly appreciated. Satellite worship, we're again just so grateful for what's happening at the Journey Neighborhood Center every single Sunday, as well as Home United Church, and we really do believe there's other places that God is calling us to build and resurrect and be the church as far as even Sunday morning worship on a weekly basis. We're grateful for all of these things, and that whole investing in the next generation is something that you will see us continue to do even more of as we head into this year. So as a church, we're excited about this next year and just really believe God continues to lead us.
Yeah, it really is an exciting time in our life together, and I can imagine some of what the thoughts might be going out there, but I just think in transition times, one of my prayers over the last few months has been, for us just to continue to offer one another grace and space. That because this ministry that God has given us, it's not all on one person. God's at the center of it. It's on all of us. And there are going to be things that will change, and that's just normal. And there'll be things that we'll miss, and that's just normal. And there'll be things that we'll get excited about, and that's just normal. And so looking forward to just all of that. But grace and space, there is no they. There is no they. It's us. And that's pretty cool.
So we have some scriptures that we'd love to take a little walk through, and this is all leading to time of communion in a few minutes, and we will invite you as you come forward to communion today to choose one of these scriptures and take it as a verse or a word from God for this year as we enter into it. And so we'll walk through some of these scriptures now, and again, this is sort of preparing us to come and get a scripture verse, each of us, for this year as we move forward into it. Matthew 11, 28 to 30. This is from the Message translation, and Jesus says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion?"
Great questions to ask on January 1st.
Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. I love this line. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live lightly, freely, and lightly. The more traditional translation says, "Come to me, find your rest in me." And I forget what it says actually, but yeah. But it's good too. It's good too. And it's on the reverse of the card if you want to see that one. Yeah.
It's a good verse.
Maybe, but this is one. Some of us, we've been running too fast, and we just as we head into this new year, got to stop the nonsense and take time to rest in God. Rest isn't necessarily laziness at all. Actually, in this case, it's actually being intentional and active in creating space to lean into God. To lean into God. And for some of us, that might be the most important thing we can do as we head into this year. Those spiritual practices, Dwayne mentioned 15 minutes with God. That's a way we can do that on a daily basis, to rest in God. It's an amazing transforming experience that you can have every single morning. For some of us, it might be the idea of Sabbath. That's that unforced rhythms of grace to really make this year we add into our life. Every week, I'm going to choose a time and I'm going to stop and just rest and just let her be. And trust it all will be well. So that might be for some of us a verse to either translation to take away.
The next one is one that's really been governing me for the last couple of years, but this year really raised up quite high. And this is the Message translation, and I go back and forth between putting together the Message and more traditional translations together. But trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. I'm pretty sure that was written just for me. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. That aspect of trusting God is a really big one. And what does it look like? I think it's as we try to listen and discern and those paths and directions where life can seem like a maze that Jen was talking about earlier, trying to listen for where God is leading, because I do believe that God is leading each and every single one of us if we're open to listening and to following. Trust is so essential to all of our relationships. When you blow trust, it's really hard to rebuild it. And there are so many people and messages in our culture that teach us you can't trust anyone. Don't trust anyone. Don't rely on anyone else because they're going to let you down. And part of the reason that we're offering this scripture and all scriptures is that these are words that when we reflect on them, when they start to come into our bodies and into our minds and our hearts, they really can change our perspective. So when the world tells us, don't trust, Scripture says, trust God. And that's an invitation I hope that we'll continue to lean into.
Yeah, cool. Another scripture is from Matthew 17, 20, 21. I'll read it and then I'll share just a bit of the context. So this is Jesus talking to the disciples. He replied, "Because you have so little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." So the context of this is Jesus' disciples have tried to heal a young boy, and they haven't been able to do it. And Jesus comes along, and of course, he heals the young boy, and then he has this conversation with them. And what strikes me from this is sometimes it's so easy to underestimate what God can do. And this isn't about, want to really be clear, this isn't about someone who doesn't have enough faith not being healed. That's not theologically what we're talking about here. It's about us working with God and believing what God can do. I love the mountain idea of move from here to there. There's a song that we often sing called Mighty to Save. I actually now call it the mountain moving God song, because in this song there's a line that says he will move the mountains. And sometimes we have mountains in our lives that need to be moved. It could be a relationship challenge. It could be resourcing, financial issues. It could be anything, but sometimes we live only in fear and not in this ability to have the faith to believe that God really can do the impossible. And so for some of us, as we enter this new year, it's like that might be the scripture for us, that with God, all things are possible and mountains can be moved. Back this summer, Mark Woolard was doing a message, and we were into the Bible series, and we were into Revelations. Revelations is basically a letter that was written to the churches, and Mark asked this simple question at the beginning of his message that totally rocked me. He said, what would Jesus' letter be to us, our church today? And sometimes these questions get asked and, there's nothing, right? But sometimes it's like, boom. And this was a boom for me. And it was this. Jesus' letter, in my mind, in my spirit, to our church these days would be risk more. And then I said, oh no. But for some of us, this scripture might be the right time for us to pray about this one and see where God might take it.
One final one, and we're going to have the opportunity for you to also fill in a blank. But this passage from Philippians, and those of you who know or have heard me talk about this, Philippians chapter 4, Message version, my favorite chapter of the Bible. I had the opportunity, if you want to call it that, to be sitting in the emergency ward recently. What is it with hospital gowns anyway? Really? Could they not design those better? I just got to say. So, you're sitting there, and I'm in an emergency, and there are people in the different cubicles, and there's, a person with just a horrible back that the only way he could deal with his back was just to swear his way through everything. A beginning apprentice chef who had cut his finger. It didn't look good for the future for him, like that in his chosen profession. And I'm sitting there, and I'm, swinging my legs and just trying to figure out what in the world am I doing here and what am I going to do? And if you don't know, I'm actually a worrier. Those of you who know me say, yeah, of course, inner control freak.
Thanks for letting us know. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I can catastrophize anything. I really, really can. And so instead of, sitting there and imagining all of the worst, this came, and it says, this is the NRSV press, and I'm going to just go with the one I like better. Don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray. Let petitions and praises shape your worries into prayers, letting God know your concerns. And before you know it, a sense of God's wholeness, everything coming together for good, will come and settle you down. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces worry at the center of your life. And so the next time you find yourself in a situation where fear and worry and anxiety is just threatening to overwhelm you, I invite you to join me in saying, don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray.
So may these scriptures be a guide for us as we head into 2017. As we said, during communion time, there'll be an opportunity to come and take one of those scriptures on a card. And there'll also be a blank card for those that maybe have a scripture, a verse or in mind that God has put in your heart today that's different from the ones that we've said. That there's an opportunity for that as well. We're going to invite the worship team up now and to lead us in a song as we prepare for communion and again for receiving of some words from God in these scriptures that will help guide us and inspire us over this year.